Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our little project of other world religions. Today we're going to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I should mention that our resources this time again was the Evidence Bible. We thank Graham Brown for a booklet that he gave us, which was very, very helpful, as well as we were able to access the Jehovah's Witness own website for much of this information. But when we embarked on this project to give our congregation some information about other major religions, we never intended to denigrate or criticise, only to educate. However, with Jehovah's Witness, let's call them JWs from now on, it is difficult to educate without consigning many of their beliefs and practices to the rubbish tip. Just how important this is was brought home to me recently when I mentioned our project to a friend, and he said, "Isn't JWs just another Protestant religion?"
Sorry.
Today, we'll begin with a little bit of background, then look at some of the key figures who shaped the JW theology. Then next week, we'll discuss the doctrine and look at the Jehovah's Witness Bible.
Background. Jehovah's Witnesses are best known for their door-to-door evangelism, with a requirement of the sect that every member spends 5 hours a week knocking on doors. This is part of their work towards salvation. Thus, you are very likely to have a visit from them if you haven't already. Many JW Witnesses is what might be called a man-made religion, with little prophecy or message from the Lord directing the founder. No, the forerunner to the JW movement, the Russellites, was started in 1870 by an 18-year-old lad named Charles Taze Russell. Perhaps this is why the movement is often referred to as juvenile witnesses. The movement operates very much like a corporation, with a president, a board of directors, and an inner group of governors. This is important, as you will see later.
The key figures in the movement have been the 7 presidents of the organisation, which includes the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. But we'll only talk about 3 of them for their major contributions to the movement. As Bron mentioned, Charles Taze Russell was born in 1852 and died in 1916 at the age of 64. As a young man, Russell attended a Presbyterian church, but at 16 years of age began to struggle with his faith, as there were so many sects with differing doctrines. Evidently, Russell did not like the biblical teaching of judgment and eternal punishment in hell, and reasoned that when a person dies, they simply stop existing.
A chance encounter with a Baptist who introduced him to the Adventist teaching of William Miller, who proclaimed that Christ would return in 1843. This was before Russell was born, but Miller's followers carried on with their belief and recalculated predictions of their own, and Russell shunned that also. Soon, Russell began his own Bible study group in Pittsburgh, known as the Millennium Dawn Bible Study, and became known as Pastor Russell. In 1875, Russell was introduced to the idea that Jesus Christ had returned invisibly to earth in 1874. Russell also prophesied that Jesus would return in 1914 and wrote many articles supporting his belief in his magazine Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Present, which later became known as the Watchtower. He also predicted Christ's return in 1925.
Obviously, none of these things have happened. He also denied that Jesus was God in human flesh, rejecting the Holy Trinity and many other Christian doctrines. People became fascinated with his end-of-the-world predictions, and in 1884 he formed the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. After his death, the movement was on shaky ground until the new president stepped in about a year later. In his will, Russell had named a list of 5 trusted colleagues to work together to promote the society, but an ambitious man not on the list campaigned heavily to change the status quo.
Judge Joseph Rutherford, born 1869, was president from 1917 until his death in 1942. Rutherford was a very colourful character, to say the least, but probably had more to do with the formulation of the JW movement as we know it than any other president since. Indeed, it was he who invented the name Jehovah's Witness in 1931, based on Isaiah 43:10, which says, "You are my witnesses, says the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen." The Watchtower Society boastfully claims to be the only channel of divine truth today, and that no one can be saved but by their organisation.
However, it was his deeds and personal life which is extraordinary, and one must wonder about the integrity of such a man to be president of the JW Society and hold this position for 25 years. Just listen to this. He was a lawyer, but not a judge, although he called himself one. He did once sit on the bench when somebody came ill.
He basically staged a coup to remove the men nominated by Russell and assumed the presidency. He built a mansion in San Diego named Beth Surim using JW money, even though JW headquarters are in New York on the other side of America. He evidently justified this saying that when Abraham, Jacob and Isaac and other great men of God were resurrected, they would need somewhere nice to stay. Wow.
Amazing. He was known to be a heavy drinker, some say an alcoholic, and illegally imported whiskey from Canada during the Prohibition years, paying for it with JW money. In 1918, he was imprisoned by the US government for subversion, which is anti-American comments.
He wrote many books stating his position on all manner of things, gradually replacing Russell's writings with his own. Thus it can be said with absolute surety that he was anti-Semitic, meaning anti-Jewish, racist, meaning anti-black people, a Nazi sympathiser and a sexist. He campaigned heavily against women having a greater role in society. He was married, but it was quite likely that he had a lengthy affair with an attractive woman. He engaged as nurse and dietitian, even though she had no such qualifications, and she travelled with him all over the world. Rutherford was followed by
the third president, Nathan Knorr. He was born in 1905, died in 1977 at the age of 72, and was president until 1977. He basically continued Rutherford's policies, but with an added focus on expansion and education, establishing the Watchtower Bible College and a missionary school. It was Knorr who introduced the doctrine banning blood transfusion, causing the unnecessary death of thousands of people over the years, including my auntie. Also, as many JW beliefs were being questioned and refuted by Bible scholars, Knorr just had the Bible rewritten, and in 1961 released the New World Translation, which blatantly alters many verses which reveal errors in the Watchtower teachings. Now, there's a lot more to talk about, but we'll leave that till next week, otherwise this dissertation will become too long. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. What? Hello and welcome to part 2 of our lecture on the Jehovah Witnesses sect. Last week we spoke about the foundations of the sect and the first 3 presidents. Today we will talk about some of their beliefs and look at the Jehovah Witnesses Bible, the New World Translation. JWs reject the biblical concept of a triune God, saying that it is difficult to love and worship a complicated, freakish-looking three-headed God. They reason that the God cannot be a trinity. After all, God made man in his image, and no one has ever seen a three-headed human creature. Based on Isaiah 43:10, they believe the only true God is known as Jehovah, the Almighty. Although he is eternal, everlasting, and omnipotent, having great power, he is not omnipresent, present in all places at the same time. JWs also deny the deity of the Holy Spirit.
This is amazing because the Jehovah's Witnesses also have a major problem with Jesus. Firstly, they reject the notion that Jesus is God incarnate, that is, having bodily form, saying that he is just a created being. They also believe that before Jesus came to earth, he was Archangel Michael. Then, through the virgin birth, he was later recreated on earth as the perfect man. They also believe that Jesus only became the Messiah at his baptism by John and was then appointed to become king of the coming kingdom. JWs also deny the bodily resurrection of Christ. They believe that after Jesus was buried, God disposed of his physical body, but they don't say how or where. Jesus was then raised as a spirit creature and temporarily materialized to make himself visible to his disciples. Now back in heaven, he is once again known as Archangel Michael. Really? Can you picture this? Here we have Jesus as a spirit, putting on a fake body, complete with nail holes in his hands and feet, just to fool his disciples. Then he takes a major demotion from being the Son of God to become an angel. It just doesn't make sense. They also deny the existence of hell as a place of punishment. They cite 4 reasons why this cannot be true. 1, it is wholly unscriptural, or really, as we know, it's mentioned several times in the Bible. It is unreasonable. Why is it unreasonable that God would punish sinners? It is contrary to God's love, but God also judges, and again, there's lots of evidence of that in the Bible. And then lastly, they say it's repugnant to justice, and as we know, God is absolutely just.
The JW's theology of heaven is equally as interesting, as it is based on their interpretation of the book of Revelation 14:1-5. They teach that when the saints go marching in, you will not be in that number, because the only ones to enter heaven will be the 144,000 chosen ones from JWs. This includes the disciples of Jesus and faithful ones from the time of Charles Russell and the generation alive in 1914. They conveniently skip over Revelation 7:5-8, which says there will be 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and Revelation 7:9-17, which says there was a multitude too many to number, from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Notice that Revelation 14 and Revelation 7 use the same words, standing before the throne. Also, in John 10:16, Jesus says, there are other sheep that I must bring.
So for the vast majority of remaining Jehovah's Witnesses, known as the other sheep or other mob, Christ's sacrifice on earth provided only a chance at eternal life on earth. They will never go to heaven. Their only hope is to live in the paradise created on earth after the Armageddon. Interestingly, in 1995 they abandoned their belief that Armageddon would occur during the lives of the generation of 1914, and in 2010 changed their teaching on the generation to include current generations who would overlap the chosen generation. And that's a direct quote from Watchtower on the 15th of June 2010. JWs believed that all mankind inherited imperfection from Adam and Eve and are thus sinners. Okay, but then they believed that sin was only partially atoned for by Christ. Christ atoned for the original sin, but not man's ongoing sin and rebellion. So man must work to earn forgiveness for their present and future sins.
New World Translation exposed. To call the New World Translation a translation at all is a travesty. Let us point out a few changes made to alter the context of the Bible. John 1:1. The New King James Bible says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." The New World Translation changes this by inserting an A, so it reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God."
Colossians 2:9, the New King James Version says, "For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily." The New World Translation says, "Because it is in him that all the fullness of divine quality dwells bodily." Really? They changed Godhead, meaning deity, to divine quality?
Zechariah 12:10, the New King James Version says, in part, "Then they will look on me whom they pierced." JWs do not want their followers to know that Jesus is Jehovah. So this is changed to, "And they will look to the one whom they pierced through."
There are many more fallacies and false teachings we could mention, but again, time does not permit. Suffice to repeat the words of the Apostle Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, verses 13 to 15. He said, "For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works." So again, we've run out of time, ladies and gentlemen, but we thank you for listening, and we hope that you've learned something from this presentation.
We certainly have. Wow. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.